Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me for these live internet studies week after week. My name is Ariel Ben Lyman Hanavi. These live internet studies are an hour and a half long. They're broken up into two segments. First segment is 1 hour long. It's entitled Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End Time Events. Eschatology is a study of topics like the book of Daniel, Old Testament prophecies that talk about the end of days, the discourses given by Yeshua in the Gospels, rapture topics, Mystery Babylon falls in there, Book of Revelation. We're working our way actually towards that. So if this is the type of topic you're interested in, then you're in the right place. Just stay where you're at. The second 30-minute segment is entitled A Trinitarian Response to Biblical Unitarianism. We pit Trinitarian theology against non-Trinitarian theology. And right now we're in the middle of this kind of excursus paper that I wrote. We're not looking at passages per se. We're looking at this idea of asking this very valuable question: must one believe that Jesus is God in order to be saved? And there are those who take the opposite position, that since Jesus is not God, that perhaps believing that he is God is a detriment to your salvation or prevents you from engaging in genuine salvation. So we're entertaining this. It's a bit philosophical, I understand, but it's a very important topic among those of us who have these discussions on how important is it to affirm that Jesus is God. Is it enough to experience salvation that we just affirm his atonement? So if that topic interests you, stick around for the final second segment. Okay. Let's jump into the first topic. If you look on your screen right now, this is Eschatology, a Biblical Study of End Time Events. And we've been working our way down through these 18 topics. We're at topic 12, right where you see the yellow part, where it says Rapture Views of Final Analysis. And let me just go over the 4 rapture views very briefly that we're basically examining. This is not exhaustive, by the way, but I'm working from the 4 basic views that they all fall into the category of historic premillennialism. Historic premillennialism is this kind of this system of theology that looks at end times and sees these really big pieces. Let me see real quick if I have something in just by way of a slide that I can show you, graphic real quick. I should have had it pulled up in advance, but I never know what I'm going to say in advance. Sometimes I should follow an outline, and that would help me. Historic premillennialism, A, D, C, D, G, F, G, H. Where's my H's? H, I, J. Wow. It's under timelines. No wonder. Okay. It's right here. Okay. So if you look at this slide, historic premillennialism, let me make that full screen easier. Historic premillennialism has this big piece, big picture, zoom out view, like what I've heard people sometimes call the 30,000 foot view. But basically, if you can see from start to finish, it's a timeline of essentially the last 2,000 years, starting with Jesus' birth at the far left and culminating with a new heaven and a new earth on the far right. The timeline reads left to right, obviously, because that's how time works for us humans. So I'm just going to rattle off the big pieces on the list so you can kind of follow along. Got the kingdom of God being manifest. That's the time frame when Jesus was here on earth. It was manifest in Messiah. Although there was more to this kingdom than just what's internal, there's always been an external kingdom that both Israel has been looking forward to, and now we, the church who have been grafted into Israel, can also look forward to. And by the way, there's only one kingdom. There isn't a separate kingdom for Israel and a separate kingdom for the church that we're going to be enjoying one day. The Old Testament kingdom that looked forward to Yeshua and his physical kingdom, now that Yeshua has come and gone, via the rest of the apostolic scriptures, namely the ones that were handed down through Paul, we can now begin to understand that the mystery of the gospel is that the kingdom that was promised to Israel has now included the kingdom that is to be enjoyed and participated in by we Christians, by we Gentiles who've been grafted into the family of Israel at the faith level, at the remnant level, as we place our faith in Jesus without having to become Jewish or something like that. So Yeshua preached the kingdom, yes, to Jewish people, But Paul would later pick up on the same gospel message of the kingdom and preach it to Gentiles, not so that they can come into the physical kingdom of Israel, but so that they can join Israel's promises at the spiritual level. And then once Israel becomes saved, the fullness of this kingdom would be actualized one day as we all participate together. Because there's only one king, therefore we can only have one kingdom. Now, I know some of you are going to push back and you're going to go, but Ariel, what about the New Jerusalem floating above the physical Jerusalem? My point is it's still one kingdom over all of them, even though it's got some different dynamics that we're not used to reading about. Some of the kingdom people have resurrected bodies, some of them don't. Some of the people are largely here on earth, some of them are in this New Jerusalem. But there's still only one king. There's only one God. There's one king. There's one spirit. There's one faith that brings us all here. And you can only get into the kingdom if you have faith in Yeshua. So the kingdom promised to Israel can only be enjoyed as they eventually find their way into Messiah. Now, we'll flesh out more of the details later as to what about natural Israelites who are born in the millennium, who don't believe in Jesus. Where are they going to be? Okay, yes, there will be a kingdom on earth in that regard. But I'm digressing. Let's go back to this chart just briefly. The ascension of Yeshua is on this chart because it's part of the historical landscape of these large pieces that we're looking at. The kingdom, however, where largely Yeshua is within us, that part of the kingdom, the part that's not yet physical, meaning it's more internal, that remained through the Holy Spirit. Still on earth, it's here today, and we're in that kind of time frame right now. So we could say we're in the church age, if you want to call it that. I'm fine with that. But notice that on the chart now, down at the bottom, we have the apostasy and tribulation that breaks out. And this we recognize could signal the time frame of the 70th week of Daniel, when Antichrist is already ruling. He's on the scene. He is disrupting the plans of God. He's basically trying to set up a counterfeit kingdom. He's trying to rule in the hearts of those who've rejected Messiah here on planet Earth. And largely, in part, he's successful. And promises in the Tanakh give him a space to reign. It's a very short time, but he eventually does succeed in bringing largely the entire world underneath his control. A beast empire that we're going to talk about when we look at Mystery Babylon around the corner. It's basically the next topic on my topical list for eschatology. So this is going to necessitate a final judgment on Satan, on his beast empire, on those who are his followers, his worshipers, the earth dwellers, as well as judgment upon the wicked principalities and powers that have rebelled against God from the very beginning. We're talking about the spiritual forces, wickedness in high places, as Paul calls them in the book of Ephesians. We're going to have to see a judgment on them as well. So we got that line there that talks about, that line that's showing there under apostasy and tribulation. That's probably maybe the midpoint of the week. Return of Christ, the first resurrection, there's the rapture. From that point, again, big picture, the whole 70th week of Daniel is not really being parsed out here. We're just looking at the big pieces. But in this chart, return of Christ leads into the millennium, meaning the end of this age draws to a proper culmination with the destruction and death of Antichrist and the casting of him into the lake of fire, basically, or destruction in that regard. But then Jesus begins to rule and reign rightfully here on planet Earth. I follow a model at this point in time that has the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven happening at this point in time, following Alan Kirshner's lead. And there's some important details in the book of Revelation towards the very end, like starting after chapter 20, going on to the last 2 or 3 chapters, 20, 21, 22, that give indication, a good indication, that the kingdom should be coming down out of heaven at the beginning of the millennium, not at the end of the millennium like many Christian churches teach. But even if I'm wrong, it doesn't matter per se. This chart, historic premillennialism, sees the new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem coming down at the near the very end, at the end of the at the end of the millennium. But in this view, in the historic premillennialism, germane to my point is that the millennium is that real physical 1,000-year time frame when Satan is bound and the kingdom is consummated, and there is a ruling king, a real physical Jesus reigning from the millennium. It's not a millennium of a kingdom in our hearts anymore. Jesus is here bodily. We're able to enjoy his presence. We have resurrected bodies, of course, but Satan is also bound during that time. I mean, look around right now. Satan's clearly not bound. If he were bound, he couldn't really bring the man of lawlessness onto the scene. So historic premillennialism sees that Jesus is not here bodily right now. Rather, we're waiting for the return of Christ to usher in a physical. That's why we say historic premillennial. The pre part is that the rapture takes place pre the millennium. Of course, the final pieces on this chart are that at the end of the 1,000 years, God allows Satan to be loosed. There's this massive rebellion led by Gog and Magog. And we have one more rebellion, but Jesus is the victor through God, his Father. His enemies are finally defeated there. There's a final judgment. Death also is finally judged. What do we say? The judgment of all souls, wicked, who've ever lived, finally takes place during that final great white throne judgment. What's on this chart labeled as the second resurrection, right? And then we have another era that's ushered in, which is what often is labeled the eternal state, the new heaven and new earth. And that's where some would place the bringing down of the New Jerusalem. But like I said, I think it takes place prior to the millennium. But even if I'm wrong, still nevertheless new heaven, new earth. Okay, so that's historic premillennialism. Let's go back to the 4 rapture views and just show you real quick. There are 4 basic views. There's the pre-tribulation rapture. Give me a second. Make that thing do its funny little... All right, fine. You don't want to do it. Let's try you again. There we go. Pre-trib rapture has a rapture at the beginning of the 70th week, has a second coming at the far end of the 70th week. Big players on this particular chart are a 3.5-year tribulation at the beginning of the 7 years, or occupying the first half. A great tribulation that kicks off at the midpoint, that runs the time frame of the final 3.5 years, the final end of the 70th week. God's wrath occupies a prominent spot basically across the length of the entire 7 years. And they basically teach, the pre-tribbers, teach that the church will be raptured before any of this bad stuff happens, before the final 7-year period known as Daniel's 7th week even happens. I was chatting with a Prewrather through the YouTube mechanism that allows you to send comments in below my videos. And I believe it was a female. She said, in Matthew's Olivet Discourse, or I'm sorry, in Luke's rendering of Matthew's Olivet Discourse, let's try that one again. In Luke's rendering of Yeshua's Olivet Discourse, he talks about that when you see these things begin to happen, lift up your heads because your redemption draws nigh. And I've classically understood that to mean that the rapture is very near because all of these things have been happening, and yet there are some specific signs that he immediately just got through talking about. 6th seal sign, the sun, moon, stars behaving oddly, things like that. That it's when that happens that he tells us, look up because your redemption is right there. But she brought something to my attention that I hadn't really thought of. She said, when Jesus says, when these things begin to happen, and she said, beginning means at the beginning of the 7th week. It's pretty hard to miss. That beginning means beginning. She said, then the rapture is about to happen. She goes, isn't this proof that rapture happens because he says, when you see these things begin. And the beginning of these things goes all the way back to the beginning in her mind of the 70th week, meaning the beginning of Yeshua's discussion. So it's like a summary statement that rewinds us all the way back to the beginning of the Olivet Discourse details, which would be the beginning of the 70th week. I thought, okay, that's interesting. She's got a good point there. But I think if we look at the immediate precedent, the immediate antecedent things that he's referring to, he's talking in context about the signs that he just mentioned. Otherwise, it would be worthless to give the details of the signs all throughout to people who won't be here, meaning Christians. Likewise, the context of the entire Olivet Discourse progresses in such a fashion that the persecution that we read about, known as the Great Tribulation, is meant to be for the very same people who name the name of Yeshua, because Yeshua very earlier on starts talking about starts talking about false Christ, and you better not be misled. And then he moves into talking about this great persecution for the name of Christ, and then he moves into more signs regarding this rescue operation towards the very end. But all throughout there, he also indicates, he's like, these certain things will happen, but it's not the end yet. And so if the reader who sent in the comment that said, when he said, when you see these things, lift up your head because your redemption draws nigh. Well, then now Yeshua is contradicting what he said earlier about these things will happen, but, and I'm paraphrasing, certain things will happen, but the end is not yet. So, I mean, which one of the things should we hold on to, if the rapture is near the very end, or if the second coming is near the very end? Either way, I think pre-tribbers don't quite parse out all the details correctly. So let's move on to the second position, which is the mid-trib rapture that I'm going to talk about real quick. The mid-trib rapture, let me highlight that one also. This one has a rapture right in the middle of the 70th week and puts the second coming at the far end. They've got their 3.5 year tribulation on one half. They've got their great tribulation on the second half. Their God's wrath model shrunk suddenly. Right? It's only the second half of the week. This means for the mid-tribbers, Christians are going to go through some tribulation-type activities, but they will be rescued prior to the Great Tribulation. Rescue prior to the Great Tribulation is similar to the pre-trib model. Mid-tribulation rapturists believe the rapture will occur exactly halfway through the 7-year period, just before the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Okay. Let's look at the third option. This option is quite popular, especially among Messianics. This one is called the post-trib rapture. It has a second coming and rapture right on top of one another. They're synonymous with each other. And in this way, they're using kind of a zoom out lens, a big picture, like I was talking about earlier, kind of 30,000 foot view, but not maybe quite 30,000. They are zoomed in on what they believe is a 7-year length of God's wrath. Although I've been trying to make sure that I'm researching this carefully, some post-tribbers don't believe that God's wrath runs the entire 7 years. Some of them believe that God's wrath doesn't start until sometime around the Great Tribulation, which is the second half. Or some even say it doesn't. Some like me as a Prewrather believe that it doesn't start. God's wrath doesn't really kick in until the trumpet judgments, which I think is nice. We still have our standard tribulation period that they call tribulation period at the beginning of the 7th week and spanning at least the first 3.5 years. Post-tribulation raptures believe the rapture will occur following the 7-year period known as Daniel's 70th week. And so, in case you're beginning to catch it, many different views are operating on the principle of details in the passage speak of the timing. But there's, like Dr. Heiser is fond of pointing out, there's enough information limitation. He didn't use that phrase, that's my phrase. There's enough information limitation. He used the phrase ambiguity or equivocation. There's enough mystery around the details of the rapture that allows for all of the views to have some claim in this game. Excuse me. And thus, it behooves us to have to keep pressing in and searching and praying and expecting. The big picture is Jesus is coming. But as to the details, sometimes it causes us to fight amongst each other. My point is focus on major on the majors and minor on the minors. Make sure you know who Jesus is. Make sure you know him in the pardon of your sins and you're claiming him as Lord. If you don't got that part right, if you don't have that part right, if you don't believe that Jesus is Lord, that he is the only one who can truly save you, if you've not confessed your sins to him and surrendered your life to him, if you're not doing good works that are commensurate with the genuine salvation experience, then what good is claiming any particular rapture position? Because you're going to miss it. Jesus is coming back only for those who are part of his bride, rapture ready at that moment. However, Israel is part of the elect in God's plan, and Jesus is coming back for them as well, but at the moment they won't be rapture ready. Thus, the rapture will initiate a series of events that will culminate in Israel's salvation and rescue operation as well. Although I don't think their rescue operation requires a rapture from planet Earth up to heaven. I think it just will result in them being ushered right into the kingdom. Okay, so that's the post-trib view. Let's finalize by looking at the pre-wrath view. This is the view that I hold to. Right, let's give it a little bit of love there. So the pre-wrath rapture, let me try that again. Come on. The pre-wrath rapture, let's square it off there real quick. Pre-wrath rapture has the rapture happening sometime after the Great Tribulation is cut short, and yet before the day of the Lord, or what is recognized as God's wrath, or also called the second coming. So these names are synonymous. Second coming here, God's wrath here. These are all synonymous labels. This time frame is all the same. So we could just kind of connect the names there. The rapture itself is situated between the end of the Great Tribulation on Christians and the day of the Lord being poured out on largely on the earth dwellers who have rejected God. There is a section at the beginning of the 70th week that occupies the first 3.5 years. That's called the beginning of sorrows. There's no need to label this tribulation, although it will be quite troublesome, and functionally speaking, it is tribulation. However, it's not necessary to give it the label tribulation technically, because of the persecution by Antichrist perhaps will not have happened yet. In fact, he won't have revealed himself until the midpoint of the week. Also, the wrath of God is definitely not to be equated with that time frame. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. The pre-wrath rapturists believe the rapture will occur following the opening of the sixth seal of the book of Revelation. The church will experience severe persecution by the Antichrist. I'm just reading that definition up there in the corner there. The church will experience severe persecution by the Antichrist, but will be snatched away before God begins to pour out his wrath during the day of the Lord. So let's talk about now this time frame here, this big beginning of sorrows, and we're going to be looking at the seals. I think I have a slide that kind of talks about the seals. I don't need to. Yeah, I've got a few different slides that. Wow, why didn't I cross that out last time? Anyway, well, this is okay. We can start here. We looked at this last time. We're going to be talking about the seals tonight, finishing up this idea of, do the seals represent the wrath of God? So let's leave it at that slide and jump over to my study now. So, the seals are not the wrath of God. Pre-trib believes that they are. Pre-trib says, when the seals start being opened by Jesus, this is... Sorry about that. Let's try that one again. Jesus told John to record these words about him, the Lamb, opening the seven seals. And he's the only one worthy, right? Book of Revelation, chapter 5. Pre-trib, I keep saying pre-wrath, pre-trib thinks that this is proof positive, since Jesus is the only one who can open them, that this is proof that the first of the seals, starting with seal number 1, indicates the wrath of God. And thus, what they're doing is, pre-trib is working from the hermeneutic that if God promised in the Bible that his bride would be spared from the wrath, and if the wrath is, and if the seals are the beginning of that wrath, then the church must be excused from the seals. They must not see them because they're wrath. So I'm building like a basic syllogism with two premises leading to a conclusion. Premise number one, the church will not see wrath. Premise number two, the seals are wrath. And therefore, premise number three, our conclusion that follows from premise one and premise two, is that the church will not see the seals. Well, I'm challenging that view. We Prewrathers say, no, we will see the seals because they're not God's wrath. The wrath doesn't kick in until sometime after the Great Tribulation has already run its course. So on my point number 4 of, watch this, 5 points and a conclusion, and then we're done. So this might be a very short teaching tonight. And then we're going to begin to turn towards some articles of Prewrath, or tenets of Prewrath as listed by Dr. Alan Kirshner. We'll start to get into that. But we might even get into it tonight. Let's talk about my objection to the idea that the seals cannot be, or that the seals must be the wrath of God. I object to that. Prewrath is supported by the literary flow of Revelation. This is where I'm getting my idea that wrath hasn't happened yet. Classic Prewrathers, I go on to say, such as Robert Van Camp and The Sign, got a reference there to where I pulled this resource. Alan Kirshner, Antichrist Before the Day of the Lord. Marvin Rosenthal, The Prewrath Rapture of the Church. Some of those are some resources that I recommend. All of these Prewrath teachers emphasize that the seals prepare the way, but the actual wrath begins with the trumpets and bowls that follow the seventh seal. Go back and read Revelation 8, 1-6. You can clearly see by looking at Revelation that at this point in Revelation's narrative at chapter 8, that the seals 1-7 have already been addressed, or 1-6, and the seventh seal is that opening of the first trumpet. Remember, let me go back over to this slide. The trumpets, the seals, trumpets, and bowls have a relationship to each other. So let me draw on my screen here. The first 6 seals are primarily, excuse me, the first 6 seals are primarily things that build the momentum up to seal number 7, which then contains all of the 7 trumpets. But then it's that 7th trumpet that builds up to all of the events that are contained within the bowls, or that represent the bowls. So the 7 in each set is both a culmination, a fullness, and an initiation at the same time. So the 7th seal culminates or brings to a conclusion the seals, but at the same time it initiates the trumpets. Likewise, the 7th trumpet both finalizes or culminates all of the 7 trumpets, but at the same all of the previous 6, but at the same time it initiates the 7 bowls. And then you're asking, what happens at the 7th bowl? The 7th bowl represents the final destruction of the Antichrist wicked beast empire, the final destruction of that kingdom on earth of wickedness that has been led by a beast, by the ultimate beast himself, Satan, who is finally brought to a proper consummation. He's brought to an end. The Revelation describes him as being cast into the lake of fire, things like that. But germane to our study tonight is that when we're following the book of Revelation in its most natural sequence, in some parts of the narrative, it's obvious to the readers that John wants us to follow a sequence of events. He gives numbers to the seals. He gives numbers to the trumpets. He gives numbers to the bowls. The numbers alone tell us that there's a sequence going on. Now, we could talk about whether or not this sequence is an overlapping theme that gets reset 2 or 3 times, Or we could talk about, does it just play out in linear fashion without overlapping, without recapitulation? I'm of the impression that there's a little bit of both going on, but you have to follow the narrative carefully. One of these days, we will get into more detail in the book of Revelation. I'll even show you the outline that I follow along with. But for now, this study is just working from the hypothesis, the position, that the literary flow of Revelation allows for the seals to indicate that the wrath hasn't yet started. So we've got the actual wrath beginning with the trumpets in Revelation chapter 8. That's when we see the judgments such as, and notice what we can read when we get to chapter 8 of Revelation, which is post-seals, but now the beginning of these trumpet judgments. We see that a third of the earth and trees are burned. A third of the sea is turned to blood. Demonic torment is unleashed. Painful sores, rivers turn to blood, global darkness, Armageddon, and global devastation. And obviously, these are far more explicitly God's wrath than the wars and famines seen earlier. So when we go back over to, this particular, let's finish that one out. When we go back over to the one we were looking at earlier, this particular slide, we can see that basically the beginning of birth pangs or sorrows, the first 3.5 years, is a time period marked out by very troubling things. I'm not going to be too harsh on those who call it tribulation per se, but it's not necessary to call this whole time period the 7-year tribulation. And that's why I like to get more accurate when I say beginning of birth pangs. It's more accurate to call it the beginning of birth pangs, seals 1 through 4 there on my list that you can see, these first 4 here, because they prep planet Earth for the bad stuff that's coming down the road, the really bad stuff. And it's also a way to allow the readers of the Bible to understand that the first half of the 70th week doesn't distinguish between Jews, Christians, believers, or unbelievers. It just happens to everybody on planet Earth. It's the state of the world that's getting prepped for the beast empire of the Antichrist himself. And God allows this. It's setting the stage for the final showdown between good and evil, in which we know that good will win, right? Jesus' kingdom will overthrow, overturn, crush, and destroy, finally, one day, the wicked kingdoms of this earth. And all who oppose Jesus will have to be dealt with. But the beginning of birth pangs, as represented by the seals, by at least the first 4 there, the 4 horses of the apocalypse, those that you've seen before, but the 4 colored horses, the white one, the red one, the black one, the green, the pale one. I think that's even the order, right? Those horses represent things that happen on planet Earth that are orchestrated, or that we could say they are initiated by Jesus. Absolutely. He's the only one worthy to open the seals. So they are a direct result of Jesus causing them to happen. It's his planet. He has a right to do that. He's the only one worthy to take the scroll out of the hand of him who sits on the throne, namely his Father. So yes, Jesus initiates the seals. No question there. The question, however, is, does this follow from the fact that Jesus does crack the seals open? Does it follow from that reality that this proves that they are the wrath? My answer is no, because when you begin to read the rest of the narrative in the book of Revelation about the seals, particularly as we progress to seal number 5 and 6, we can see 2 very good reasons why I'm maintaining that the seals are not the wrath of God. And maybe I'll show them to you real quick. We have time.